Welcome to our third lunch talk. Today we have Alexander with us who will talk about the role of hydrogen in industrial decarbonization. So this is one of the regular lunch talks we have. Thanks for joining, and without any further delay, I will give the floor to Alexander to talk about hydrogen and its role. Alexander, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So I will be talking today a bit about the hydrogen hype, the current state of play and what future trends are. So we'll go over some of the ways you can produce hydrogen and some possible applications for it. There we will look into some applications which could be very useful and also debunk some myths of applications that people see for hydrogen which really doesn't make any sense in my opinion. So that having said, let's go to this slide where I try to capture a bit this hydrogen hype. So everyone is really talking about hydrogen. All companies want to do something with hydrogen. All governments are interested in investing into it. So I put like the number of Google searches for green hydrogen on the left. You can really see how this interest has taken off like crazy, and there's no sign of it coming down anytime soon. But there is this thing called a hype cycle, which a lot of new innovative technologies tend to follow, which I put there on the right. That shows how expectations of a new technology evolve over time. And for most technologies, after this amazing hype, the expectations start to come down. They start to come down when we come into the phase where we're actually rolling out these technologies and we start to see which limitations it has, which technical constraints it has, which engineering challenges it holds. And a lot of technologies, they keep stuck in this valley of disillusionment, as it is called, where the realizations come of what we can do with this technology. Then, of course, some technologies make it further into the cycle when they start to mature. Technologies like that, fall under this would be things like offshore and onshore wind and so on, where we now are getting into the phase of really making improvements in the production process of it, really start to optimize these type of systems, and they really had taken off. Now that doesn't withhold the European Union from setting very ambitious targets for this hydrogen technology. So the number that the EU has put forward is 40 gigawatts of these electrolyzers that they want to install in Europe by 2030. But 2030, that's already almost tomorrow, right? Especially when you know that today we have only about 200 megawatts of these electrolyzers installed. So to put that a bit in perspective, I put the installment rates of other climate neutral technologies there. So the rate at which we installed offshore and onshore wind and solar energy. And you can see that while the growth rates that we've seen in these technologies have been really astronomical. So for example, for offshore wind, it's around 30%. For onshore wind, it was about 35 year-over-year growth, which we are still maintaining. And for solar, it was even more impressive, a 55% year-over-year growth. But this is still nothing compared to this 70% year-over-year growth, which the European Union basically puts forward with putting this 40 gigawatts target within 1 decade. So here you can see the capacity which we have installed today, so around 200 megawatts. And the yearly additions we are doing are still in the megawatt scale, so not gigawatt scale. So around 30 megawatts per year. So that as a bit of a brief introduction. So now I will cover we'll first look upstream, so looking into the different technologies we can use to produce hydrogen. Then we'll look downstream into different applications where hydrogen can be used. And then finally, I will end off with some geopolitical aspects that are also related to hydrogen. So first and foremost, it needs to be clear to everyone that hydrogen is not an energy source. It's only a mere carrier which we can use to store electricity and use in some applications. Unfortunately, we do not find it in great amounts in the ground, like we have natural gas and oil and all these other natural resources. So for the moment, at least, it's only an energy carrier, not an energy source. And then people have come up with this amazing system to classify all the different production routes of hydrogen, and they've assigned different colors to all these different technologies you can use to produce it. And together they form this hydrogen rainbow. So yeah, I'm not really making this up. This is a thing people are putting forward. But I really don't really like this system. I think they've taken it a bit too far. But there is somewhat three, at least, production routes you should be familiar with. 3 production routes for hydrogen production. The first one would be what they call gray hydrogen, which is using steam methane reforming. I'll elaborate on that a bit later. Then there is the so-called blue hydrogen, where you're capturing CO2. And then there is all other forms of hydrogen where you do produce it electrolytically. Whether or not that classifies as green then, that's something that I will tackle later. But first, let's look at the process which is used today to produce all hydrogen demand, because there is already demand for hydrogen today, for example, in the chemical industry and so forth. So currently, 95% of all hydrogen is produced using the steam methane reforming process, where you would basically heat up water together with some hydrocarbon. Most typically, this is using natural gas, until the water starts to split into hydrogen gas and ionized oxygen. This ionized oxygen then recombines with the carbon source you add to it, creating CO2 and pure hydrogen. This, of course, is a very polluting process. It's releasing a lot of CO2, but this is the way it is done up till now. And then the remainder of all the hydrogen production is not using these cool blue hydrogen and green hydrogen technologies. No, the remainder comes from basically from as a byproduct from the chemical industry. So some other chemical processes, they release hydrogen, and that is then also being valorized by these companies. They try to sell them that hydrogen to other chemical plants, which can make use of it, or they use it in another application of their own company. So let's now talk about the electrolytic route to produce hydrogen, so making a use of electrolysis, converting electricity into hydrogen. There's different technologies available how you can do this. So the most simple one would be using an alkaline electrolyzer. This is also the most mature technology today, and it's one that you might have had to try in an early chemical class. Basically, if you just put both ends of a battery into a pot of water that you make conducting by adding an electrolyte to it, bubbles start to appear on one plate you put in the water. That would be oxygen, and then hydrogen is created at the other plate. So an alkaline electrolysis facility would do this with a membrane in between that separates the hydrogen from the oxygen, and then that hydrogen and oxygen can be sold. There is also a lot of research being done in other technologies to produce other cell types, basically to produce hydrogen. And one that's getting a lot of traction is the PEM electrolyzer, or PEM that stands for proton exchange membrane. The difference here is that you're using a polymer as a membrane that is fine enough that it basically keeps the anode and cathode electrically separated, but it allows for protons, so hydrogen atoms without an electron, to travel through from anode to cathode. That way you can also produce hydrogen. And the reason why this technology is taking off mostly is because it seems to be a lot more flexible to operate than this alkaline electrolyzer, meaning that you can ramp it up and down a lot faster. People even think to offer these kind of electrolyzers as ancillary services. So, for example, to provide frequency containment reserves and so on. because they can be, you know, ramped up and down so quickly. And then thirdly, there is solid oxide electrolysis, but I should say that this is really still in a research stage in chemical, you know, labs. But it could be very interesting because this technology, while first of all being more chemically stable, another advantage is that you can run it in reverse, and it could also act as a fuel cell, where you then, you know, feed in hydrogen and generate again electricity. And this could be a very interesting system to employ, for example, for long-term storage of electricity. If we get, you know, in 2050 to a grid which is, you know, characterized by a lot of renewables, and we need to have longer-term storage of electricity, which we cannot do with batteries. People think about using hydrogen for this instead. And if you would use then such a solid oxide electrolysis facility, you can basically have just one electrolyzer, which you can then run in the day, you know, to produce hydrogen when there is an oversupply of renewables and electricity prices are low. Then during the peak hours, you would run it in reverse as a fuel cell and you know, generate electricity again. Now, there's a big discussion on whether, you know, if you then go through the difficulty of producing hydrogen in this electric route, whether or not you can really deem that green, right? It depends on the electricity grid you are attaching it to, right? If that's still not decarbonized, it seems, at least it appears that your hydrogen already, you know, is also not green yet. Now, some people go as far to say that for you to call your hydrogen really green, you need to have a physical connection between your renewables and this electrolyzer facility. And maybe at first glance, this seems reasonable because then you're sure, right, that you're using renewable energy to create hydrogen. But if you think about it, this is really a very limiting factor that you would put on this new technology, which we try to roll out. Also, just it would be very economically inefficient to only run your electrolysis facility whenever you have renewable energy. I mean, if you install this electrolyzer in some bidding zone, you would just want this electrolyzer to react on the price that's in that bidding zone. And if you know, energy prices are almost close to zero because there's so much solar energy, you just want those electrolyzers to be generating. So the explanation is a bit more nuanced here. And also we have to consider in Europe that we have an emission trading scheme in place, which already puts a cap on emissions for the power system. So in essence, whether or not you put these weird, you know, constraints on electrolyzer and whether or not they can, their hydrogen is considered green, depending on how much renewables there are and these, all these things, it's really a bit irrelevant to the discussion. We should just be looking at which applications can use hydrogen. If there are applications they can use it, we need some electrolyzers, and these electrolyzers we want to be acting on the economic price signals which we have in liberalized energy markets. So if you're interested in that, I put a source on this which goes into a bit more detail from our research group. So let's come now to blue hydrogen, which is also an alternative to produce hydrogen in a at least carbon neutral way. In this case, you would remain using this SMR process, which uses natural gas, but you would capture the CO2. That CO2 you would store then, but you cannot, you know, build a storage facility for this. The amount of CO2 that you release is just too big, and you have to store it for the rest, for as long as you can, basically. So people think about putting this CO2 in, for example, emptied gas fields, or another way to store it would be in salt caverns, so natural cavities in the earth, which we can explode for storage. A third option would be in an emptied aquifer, so places where there is water stored underground. If you then have pumped up that water to be used as drinking water, you can use that empty cavern to store CO2 in. So do we have a lot of these cavities then? Well, we have been pumping up gas and oil for quite some time already, and that leaves us with a lot of offshore wells that are emptied already. So most notably in the North Sea, there was a lot of gas and oil, and there's plenty of these cavities. But like you can see, Belgium is quite unfortunate though, with only having a very small part of North Sea, first of all, and also in this very small piece of North Sea, at least no empty cavities. But for example, in the UK, there is being looked into this technology by British Petroleum. They are going to do a 1 gigawatt investment that's by 2030 of this kind, so storing CO2 in the North Sea. And then more closely to home, Fluxys, the Belgian gas grid operator, is also looking into a project to transport the CO2 via pipeline to Norway, then to be stored in one of the plenty empty gas fields that Norway has. That brings me to the second part, where we will be looking at the role of hydrogen in the energy transition, so looking at some applications where we can actually use it. So this slide tries to summarize where hydrogen can be used, with the emphasis on can. So there is plenty of applications which in theory can make use of hydrogen. There's a lot of chemical processes that need it. There's some applications in power systems, such as I already said, like long-term storage of electricity and so on. Also in aviation, people look into using hydrogen because, of course, for long-haul flights, it's very questionable whether that will be possible to decarbonize using batteries, since weight is such a important factor in flights. Also in shipping, there's still they still use a very dirty fuel, a heavy fuel oil. Also there they could move to using hydrogen or some derivative you make of hydrogen, some synthesized fuel. So I like this picture more, which is where you should be using hydrogen. So this is they call this the hydrogen ladder, which has been compiled by the Leibniz Association, which aims to categorize all these applications from being unavoidable to being completely uncompetitive. So among the most unavoidable applications are the fertilizer industry, methanol production, decarbonizing the steel industry, long-term storage of electricity, and so on. So the way this was being done is by looking at which technologies will be competing with hydrogen, because the assumption there is that hydrogen will be the most expensive option, so it's only going to be chosen in those applications with no alternatives. So they look at which applications do have competition with electricity and batteries, and which have competition with biogas alternatives. And using that methodology, they come up with this classification. So we'll now look a bit more into some of these applications in more detail. The first one, and in my opinion the most important one, would be for carbon neutral ammonia production. This is because ammonia production is today the biggest off-taker of hydrogen already. We use hydrogen to produce ammonia already. And ammonia is a much needed compound in the fertilizer industry, so to make crops grow at the rate that we want it. So today we consume around 8 megatons already of hydrogen in the form of ammonia. It's synthesized using this Haber-Bosch process, where you basically what you do is you use steam methane reforming to make hydrogen from natural gas. You use that hydrogen then together with nitrogen gas that you capture from the air to form ammonia, so NH3. Then the advantage of this is of course that we already are doing this today, and you can just, instead of feeding in gray hydrogen, start to add in electrolytic hydrogen instead to start to reduce emissions in this sector, but also crucially to make this process less dependent on gas. We have also seen, you know, in the past year that this is also something to take into account. It would make the EU a lot less dependent on gas if you would be using the electric route for this technology. I mean, a lot of these ammonia plants, they were cut down in the past year because of the crazy gas prices, which just completely destroyed their business case of selling ammonia. So another interesting one is to decarbonize the steel sector. Because steel, which is just one product, is responsible for almost 7% of the worldwide emissions, which is really, really tremendous. And currently, a lot of coal is used in this process. And the reason why they use coal is actually threefold. So the first one that's quite obvious is because it's a very energy-intensive process. So you need to melt this iron ore to get the impurities out and to be able to cast it. But there is another more important reason why coal is used, and that's because if you dig up iron ore out of the ground, you don't find it in iron in its pure form. You find it combined with oxygen, so rust basically. And to give, you know, iron the strength characteristics that it is known for, you need to react away this oxygen. So that is currently being done using coal. So from coal you can make cokes, which basically means that you extract the pure carbon out and you let that pure carbon react with iron oxide, which forms then CO2. So it reduces the iron ore to pure iron, and it oxidizes the oxygen in it to CO2, again releasing a tremendous amount of CO2. And then the third reason why we use coal is because we want some of this carbon, the C atoms, to end up in the steel. So this is basically what is the distinguishment between iron and steel. It has some carbon in it, which gives it a lot of the elasticity and a lot of the strength. So what can we do to decarbonize this process? Well, you use hydrogen instead to do this reduction of the iron oxides. You let this iron oxide react with hydrogen, forming water rather than CO2. So this is something that's being looked at as we speak. So already in 2016, there was this hybrid project which was launched, and it's still in development in Sweden. So they're basically building a massive steel plant that can make use of hydrogen to do the iron the reduction of the iron. And this one project alone, it would be able to reduce the Swedish emissions by 10%, which is really, really impressive. Of course, this process is also very electricity intensive because you would then use an electronic arc furnace to melt the steel. So you still need electricity for that as well. Then there is a bunch of other chemical applications which you can in which you can use hydrogen. So there is a lot in the oil refining industry, such as hydrocracking and desulfurication and so on, and all kinds of other applications. But now we will move a bit in the applications which you sometimes hear about, but could actually be, at least are quite questionable in my opinion. And the most important one there would be to use hydrogen for heating of homes. Obviously, the competition that hydrogen has there is with the alternative solution, which is using heat pumps. And I mean, we're all engineers here, I think, so it's not that hard to explain to you. I mean, it's just nonsense, right? If you would use hydrogen to heat up a home, you have to convert it to hydrogen at an efficiency of 70%. Then again, you will burn the hydrogen at an efficiency of 90% or so, and you're left with less thermal energy than electricity you started with. And electricity is the most, thermodynamically the highest form of energy, so this doesn't really make sense. Using a heat pump, you can, with 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, generate 3 or 4 kilowatt hours of thermal energy, because you basically pump heat out of the ground or out of the air with this electricity. So given the situation we're in, that we're probably already rolling out these renewables at the fastest rate possible, it's really a waste of precious renewable energy, I would say, to use hydrogen for heating of homes. So the reason why people still make this argument that we should be doing this is because it seems like an easy solution. We don't need to change or complete grid for this. We can just blend some of this hydrogen into the natural gas network and keep on using existing boilers, existing pipelines, and so on. But also, if you look a bit more into detail here, you see that this blending would only be possible for around 1% of a hydrogen blend into the natural gas. If you go above 1% of blending, all kinds of equipment in the gas network gets into trouble. So that is shown on the right figure there. For example, the gas turbines, that produce electricity from gas, they get into problem if you blend more than 1% of it. I mean, it's such a precision engineered, a piece of equipment with such small tolerances that if you just inject a different gas in it, it behaves in a different way completely, and it's not designed for that, so it's not possible. It would actually require gas-fired operators to filter out the hydrogen before they send in the gas into their turbines. So you can imagine if you then suddenly decide that it's allowed to blend hydrogen into a gas network, that, I mean, it's just insane. So now we will move into the last part of the talk, looking a bit into some geopolitical aspects of hydrogen, and most importantly, hydrogen import. So I should begin by saying that energy and geopolitics are really always been closely interlinked, right? I mean, plenty of wars have been fought over natural resources, and countries are always looking into how they can make their self unreliant of other countries for their energy needs, to be self-sufficient. Because and also, I mean, if you can export energy, it puts you in a very good position to have negotiations. And a lot of countries, they use this power of being an energy export state. And what does this have to do with hydrogen? Well, if you look at this map, it tries to show like estimated costs for the production of hydrogen. But what that in the end comes down to is basically which countries are lucky to have a lot of renewables, so that they can cheaply install solar and wind energy to then be used for hydrogen. And you can see that the countries that are benefited by this, that have a high renewable potential, they're often different countries that are lucky today by having a lot of oil and gas reserves. So if they well, first of all, if they can just already be self-sufficient by employing these renewable energies, that's already great for them. And they can already do this today with the existing renewable technologies. But if they can also, convert this renewable energy into hydrogen, which then can be sold to other countries, it could really put them more in a strong geopolitical position, where they can be leveraging their renewable energy resources to export to other countries. But what that would in essence require is that hydrogen really would be a globally traded commodity which you can sell anywhere to any country on the world. And there is a bit of a similar trend, or there's some similarity with gas trades, where at some point engineers figured out how to put gas in a ship, basically, by liquefying it. And this completely changed the gas markets. Previously, all the trade was bilateral. Some country made a deal with another country to buy the gas, and they would need to invest into a pipeline to transport it. But once they made the switch to LNG, you could put the gas in a ship, and a ship can go anywhere in the world. And this really made it into the global market that gas is today. So these ships really react to what the prices are in the different continents. So there's different gas prices in Asia, as in Europe and in the US. And while most of the LNG ships go from Russia to Asian markets and from the US to Asian markets, we saw, last year with such high gas prices that suddenly those ships would come into Europe because gas prices were just so high there. So they really, in real time, react to fluctuations in prices. And if you would find a solution to put hydrogen in a ship as well, instead of in a pipeline, it could transform that into a similar market where countries can sell their hydrogen as to other nations, and trying to leverage that geopolitical leverage, basically. So can we put it in a ship? Well, if you would want to just liquefy the hydrogen, that's actually quite hard to do. You would need to cool it down to about minus 150 degrees Celsius. And that's just a mere 20 degrees above absolute zero. It's just a tremendous challenge to do that. So what people are looking into instead is to convert the hydrogen into some other compounds and then transport that compound. And one of those compounds that is being looked at and is getting some traction is again ammonia. So what then would happen is that these kind of ammonia plants that we talked about earlier, they would be situated in the countries that do have an excess of renewable energy. They convert it into ammonia, and that can then be shipped using one of those ships. So this is not a mock-up. This is an actual ammonia ship, and that's because those already exist today. Basically, you can use a liquefied petroleum gas tanker, and liquefied petroleum gas is something that is already commonly traded in the world. You can use such a ship to transport ammonia. It needs to be transported at similar temperatures and so on. So the only drawback still is that ammonia is somewhat of a toxic substance. So there is still some safety repercussions, and people need to be trained to treat ammonia properly and so on. But at least we already have the technology in place to transport it this way. And of course, well, one more challenge that is still present today is if you then would need to crack the ammonia back to hydrogen for some application that needs hydrogen, such as steel industry, that this is not really very, very well developed yet. So there's not that much of these ammonia crackers in place, and it's a bit uncertain on how cheap that will be and so on. But as you know, there is already quite a lot of demand for ammonia, so probably this could already take off, and it makes just more sense to directly use this renewable ammonia then produced in other countries as ammonia to make fertilizer and these type of things. So, and then here on my last slide, I put the current trade for ammonia. So this is also one of the advantages of going this route is that it does already exist as a commodity which is being traded. And the reason for that is because ammonia is because fertilizers are very seasonal. There's only one season in which you need to use fertilizers on your land. And what these fertilizer industries do is they ship their fertilizer to the other side of the world in the season that it's not needed in the side of the world that they are in. Hence, there is already quite some trade, for example, from Europe to Brazil and so on. So then I will end with some key messages. So hydrogen is a carrier and not a source. You should really remember that. Then there's quite some applications which want to use hydrogen really for its molecule. So the hydrogen actually ends up in the product rather than these applications wanting hydrogen for its energy content. And it's in the beginning, at least, we believe that hydrogen will be limited to these technologies, the so-called hard-to-abate applications. So, and also, lastly, there seem to be more reasons to get excited about this ammonia rather than about hydrogen, but for some reason it's not that catchy as hydrogen, so politicians still like to talk about hydrogen more than about renewable ammonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, for such an informed talk. So hopefully after this talk, many things related to hydrogen and its application in power system as well as energy transition in general would be clear to us. So more importantly for me also, it was okay, it is not just the power system dynamics and the ancillary services part, but the other are much more important. Thank you again. So we have a small present for you. Before that, I would like to request you to I guess, where are the... So yeah, these are the sources he mentioned, and then this is a QR code for our future events as well as, I think there is one more, yeah. So this is a QR code to follow us for future events, and most importantly, please don't forget to provide feedback. You can do it immediately, just scan it and provide the feedback for the current talk so that we can improve in future. Thank you again. And yeah, so we would like to thank our speaker with a small token of gratitude from IEEE side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Yeah. We can stop it. No questions. Are there any questions online? For those who joined online? Questions from the audience here, if we have any? Okay.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. For sure, there's being looked into that, and they call these kind of hydrogen hubs or hydrogen valleys. So a lot of countries are trying to identify where their industry is located, or at least their industry that can make use of this hydrogen, to then locally set up some pipeline infrastructure to connect those. So for example, in Belgium, there is being looked at connecting Antwerp with like the area of Ghent, where you also have ArcelorMittal, which is interested in decarbonize their steel this way. There's also talk of even connecting that then with Rotterdam, because it also would then provide a nice market for this hydrogen, and would make it easier for investors to make a business case that there is some off-takers for their hydrogen, and they would invest into such an electrolyzer that they then connect to this hub. So that's really something that's also being looked into as well. Yeah, it's like 70% either way, so you're left with less than 50% only. And then, yeah, of course, typically people are already thinking like, oh, if you already lose half of the electricity, is this ever going to take off? But I think if you look at like price spreads in electricity markets, I mean, you can see even within a day that it makes these type of jumps of times 2, times 3. So there is still some arbitraging that you could do even at such a low efficiency. But yeah, I mean, these facilities that you need to convert, into hydrogen and back, these are quite expensive. So it remains to be seen whether that's really gonna take off. Yeah, possibly.
So, apart from efficiency, like efficiency is one factor. Second factor, if you consider hydrogen for ancillary services, are there also some constraint related to ramp up and ramp down speeds?
Yeah, well, so this alkaline technology seems to be quite slow in how much you can ramp it up and down. But this PEM technology, really, you can adjust almost instantly. So really on a second basis. So that's for sure quick enough to provide ancillary services. And actually in this project I mentioned, this hybrid project of this steelmaker in Sweden, there is also a researcher dedicating his PhD to looking into how this can then be used to provide ancillary services. Because if you kind of do the math of how much electrolyzers they would have installed, you can tell that basically all of the frequency containment in that bidding zone in Sweden could be done by just that one giant steel plant. So they are for sure looking into that because, yeah, I mean, all these services also cost the transmission operator quite some money, and it's always nice to get some more competition on that because typically it's only limited to a couple of power plants that can offer it in a certain bidding zone. So if suddenly you have these kind of smaller scale investments that also could participate in this, that could actually make it a lot more economically efficient. Yeah, right. That's the argument people make, and why I also think we for sure need it for some technologies. Yeah, in the end, we'll come at some stage where emission prices are so high that it would just be crazy to still invest in these other technologies. So people will naturally still go for these electrolyzers anyway, even considering the losses. That's why I always also try to somewhat distinguish the debate from this, you need renewables to then be connected to these electrolyzers. I look at it separately. There is a huge market for electricity, and there is some applications that do need this hydrogen. So let's just put these electrolyzers wherever they are needed, so they're connected to the grid and can start to produce this hydrogen. They are simply willing to pay a lot for hydrogen because, yeah, they need it in their processes and they do not have other decarbonization routes. So I think even though the losses are quite high, we will see investments into these technologies. Yeah, that's always the driving force, right? But we're very cold, investors are thinking about. They're not thinking about wanting to decarbonize or whatever. They look at the business case, and at some points, emission prices will rise to that level that it just doesn't make sense to invest in an SMR, based production route. I mean, especially if you just looked at the past gas prices at that stage, it would just be insanity to still invest in such technologies. So, I mean, a lot of chemical giants are looking into these investments. So I think we're really at that tipping point where investments are being made at the prices we see today. Yeah, these targets are always basically economic nonsense, right? There is no reason why you would need exactly 40 gigawatts. It's either an overestimation or either an underestimation, and in either way it would be not good. But yeah, we did this as well for renewables, and now we are somewhere, you know, where we were able to, for example, get these 20% renewables by 2020, and now we're putting even more ambitious targets also for 2030 and so on. So they do seem to work, right? So in the end, and I mean, you do get these learning effects starting by setting these by incentivizing these technologies. So in that sense, it's good. It does work, but you could, of course, question whether it's the best way to get these technologies in place. And it remains to be seen, I would say. This 40 gigawatts, I wouldn't say it's feasible today with the amount I have seen. I mean, that kind of goes back to the kind of rollout rate we would need to see, right? The growth rate we would need to see in these technologies. So it's very hard to believe those numbers. But yeah, we'll see in a couple of years, I guess. At least the ambition is there. You have to give that to them, yeah.
Are you aware of major bottlenecks in primary hydrogen electrolyzers, similar batteries and lithium?
Yeah, that's also an additional factor that's now into the debate, right? These rare earth materials and so on seem to be very scarce, and we need tremendous amounts of them, not only for our renewables, but yeah, also in these electrolyzers, you do have very specific metals on the cathode and anode materials. But from the little that I know about this, what I hear is that there's a lot of research being done in different anode and cathode materials, somewhat similar to batteries. And I mean, I think it's just a question of time, and this goes for both electrolyzers as for batteries, I think, that we get into innovations in the rare earths that we need, which allows to free up a bit this constraint, and allows us to find different cathode materials that we can then use to roll out these technologies. An argument that other people also make is that because in the debate, basically, how much will we electrolyze and how much will we do, with hydrogen? That, for example, you do need a lot less investments into your grid, so a lot less copper and so on. And I mean, there's something to be said about that, but remains to be seen also as well, I think. But it's kind of the same story. It has precious metals in it, just like any other renewable technology. So it's something to be considered for sure. Yes. Yeah, I also recall that the article, but after that, I've not really seen a lot of follow-up about it. So yeah, that would be really like a way of biologically directly converting solar energy into hydrogen. But yeah, I think we're already so far, right? With photovoltaics, they're already so cheap. I think that's for sure will hold back such a new technology to be really rolled out at a vast scale. Also with the problem, then you're left with hydrogen out of your solar panel. But these solar panels, we typically put them, you know, in households. What are they gonna do with this hydrogen? Are they gonna collect it? Or you could say maybe it makes more sense to put it on roofs of industrials that can make use of it. Perhaps that could be a case, but then still, it might just be cheaper to put solar panels, of which the cost already has come down so much, and put an electrolyzer if you really want to have hydrogen, right? Yeah. Yeah, you have to be quite mad to then decide to invest in something completely new, uncharted territory. These people are always quite cautious, right, with the decisions they make. So I think that's a bit where the issue lies with that technology. Any more questions?
So once again, thank you for such a nice discussion, and we can again thank our speaker.